You can't stop me from seeing my ex anytime I want. He's an integral part of my life, Lauren said, her voice steady but sharp, echoing across the quiet living room as Ryan stood by the window, watching the afternoon light spill over the hardwood floors. He didn't respond, only let the words settle between them like a weight, his mind tracing every memory that led to this moment. The countless nights he had stayed up calming her after arguments with Blake, the careful planning of family vacations, the way he had handled bills, repairs, and her emotional storms with patience and love, believing that their bond was unshakable, yet now facing a reality where all his devotion seemed invisible, where the person he trusted the most saw him as just background noise, someone to be tolerated rather than cherished. And in this realization, Ryan felt a quiet clarity, a line drawn in the sand not with anger, but with self-respect, understanding that his next move would not be dictated by jealousy or confrontation, but by the simple act of choosing himself over being diminished. Lauren, oblivious to the storm brewing behind his calm demeanor, continued to assert Blake's importance in her life, recounting their shared memories and inside jokes, laughing lightly as if testing Ryan's reaction, seeing only the gentle restraint in his expression, interpreting it as weakness, a space where she could dominate. Yet Ryan's silence was a shield, a deliberate pause that carried more weight than any argument, reflecting his awareness that love without respect is a cage, and he would not remain imprisoned in someone else's definition of priority. As the afternoon faded into evening, Ryan moved deliberately around the room, not to confront, but to prepare, gathering his personal effects, ensuring that his decisions were measured and purposeful, that he would leave no ambiguity about the respect he demanded, a quiet assertion that while he had built a life with Lauren, he would not be complicit in a narrative where her past dictated the terms of his present. And in this space, he found a strange freedom, the power of choice crystallizing in his chest, reinforcing that departure could be an act of dignity rather than defeat, a statement that true strength often manifests in restraint. And as Lauren continued to speak, unaware of the depth of his resolve, Ryan felt the calm certainty of a man who had loved deeply but would not bend to a reality that diminished him. Knowing that every step he would take from this point forward was not just a movement away from the living room, but a movement toward reclaiming his identity and establishing a boundary that no past love could invalidate, a silent declaration that the life he chose to lead would be defined by self-respect, patience, and the understanding that sometimes walking away is the only way to be fully present for oneself. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room, Ryan's decision solidified, the quiet act of leaving becoming his voice, his stand, his message that no one, not even the one he loved, could make him accept less than he deserved, marking the beginning of a journey not fueled by vengeance or bitterness, but by the power of calm, deliberate, and dignified action that would shape the rest of his story. The next morning, Ryan awoke with a quiet determination, the memory of Lauren's words from the night before lingering in the air like a shadow that refused to dissipate. He moved methodically through the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast while his mind weighed every possible outcome, reflecting on the countless times he had accommodated Lauren's wishes and how, despite his patience, she had chosen to elevate someone else's presence above his own. A realization that cut deeper than any argument could. Yet instead of anger, a calm clarity settled over him, reinforcing that the choices he made today would define his boundaries and self-respect. Lauren entered the kitchen with her usual cheerfulness, unaware of the internal storm that Ryan had been navigating, talking animatedly about a new project Blake had invited her to. Oblivious to how her words highlighted the growing distance between them, and Ryan listened, nodding occasionally, his silence a deliberate act of restraint, his presence there more a witness to the reality than a participant in her narrative. And as she continued, he recalled the quiet evenings they had spent planning their future, the shared dreams that now seemed fragile against her insistence that Blake remained central to her life, a thought that would have previously triggered debates or attempts at persuasion. But now he understood that asserting his worth did not require confrontation, that stepping back could be an expression of strength rather than defeat. He sipped his coffee and contemplated the patterns that had led to this point, recognizing that respect is reciprocal, and his unwavering commitment to himself was the priority. not the validation of someone who failed to see the value he brought to their shared life. And in this moment, Ryan made a conscious decision to act with dignity, to communicate without drama, to reclaim his time and space with intentionality, ensuring that his actions were guided by clarity rather than emotion, by purpose rather than reaction. And when Lauren finally asked him to discuss her plans to meet Blake, he responded with measured words, expressing understanding of her desire to maintain connections, yet reinforcing his own need for boundaries. A balance struck not in anger, but in self-assurance. And as Lauren paused, momentarily taken aback by his composed tone, Ryan felt a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that his choices reflected integrity. That leaving space for himself was not abandonment, but a statement of self-worth. And as the morning light continued to filter through the windows, he envisioned the steps ahead, each one deliberate and grounded in the principle that love and respect cannot be demanded, only mutually shared, and that sometimes the most powerful action is the one that asserts dignity, preserves personal boundaries, and allows both parties to confront reality with honesty, a lesson in navigating complex emotions. With calm, thoughtful resolve, shaping the course of his life not by the whims of others, but by his own deliberate and respectful decisions. Ryan stepped out into the crisp morning air, the city around him bustling with a rhythm he no longer felt compelled to match, his thoughts tracing back to the previous evening's revelations as he walked past familiar cafes and streets that once held shared memories with Lauren. Each step was deliberate, a reflection of the new boundaries he had established, the clarity he felt forming a protective barrier around his emotions, preventing the past from overwhelming the present. And as he paused at a small park, he watched children play, their laughter a reminder that life continued beyond individual pain. And he recognized that moving forward did not require erasing the past, but embracing the lessons it offered, the necessity of self-respect and the strength found in quiet resilience. Meanwhile, Lauren prepared for her meeting with Blake. Oblivious to Ryan's deliberate steps toward independence, her anticipation mixing with a twinge of uncertainty as she wondered if he truly understood her intentions, and Ryan's absence from the anticipated confrontation left a void that prompted reflection rather than panic, his silence speaking volumes about the respect he demanded for himself, the integrity with which he conducted his life, and the awareness that some responses are best delivered through action rather than words. As he continued walking, Ryan considered the implications of choice and consequence, the idea that relationships thrive on mutual respect and honesty, and that walking away when those principles are compromised is not defeat, but an assertion of dignity, reinforcing the importance of aligning actions with personal values. And he felt a sense of empowerment in realizing that maintaining composure in the face of emotional turbulence was a testament to his character. He entered a small bookshop, browsing the aisles with a sense of calm detachment, reflecting on the conversations he had once engaged in with Lauren about shared futures and how the divergence of paths did not negate the respect for those shared experiences, but rather highlighted the necessity of redefining personal priorities. And as he lingered near a window, watching the city pulse with life, he understood that the choice to prioritize self-worth, to step back from scenarios that undermine his value, was a form of active self-care, a demonstration of quiet strength that ultimately influenced the dynamics of his relationships in subtle but profound ways. And as Lauren's thoughts wandered toward the upcoming meeting, unaware of the internal shifts within Ryan, he felt a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that his path forward was guided not by retribution, but by measured, thoughtful action that respected both himself and the reality of their evolving lives. Ryan walked through the quiet streets in the late afternoon, his mind replaying the subtle tensions that had built over the past weeks, the anticipation of Lauren's upcoming decisions weighing on him, but balanced by a calm resolve that he had cultivated through reflection and self-awareness. He paused at a familiar corner, watching the sun cast long shadows across the pavement, recognizing that his patience and restraint were forms of quiet power, allowing him to navigate emotional complexities without succumbing to impulsive reactions. And as he continued, he contemplated the notion of personal boundaries, understanding that stepping back from toxic interactions was not a retreat, but a deliberate strategy to preserve dignity and clarity, a lesson reinforced by previous experiences that had demanded both empathy and assertiveness. Inside his favorite coffee shop, he settled at a window seat, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the soft murmur of patrons, and he observed couples and friends interacting, each moment a reminder of the diverse ways humans manage connection and conflict, reinforcing his belief that his response to Lauren's insistence on her autonomy needed to be guided by composure, thoughtful analysis, and strategic patience rather than immediate confrontation. Meanwhile, Lauren prepared for her own series of meetings, unaware of Ryan's deliberate choice to maintain distance, her mind occupied with the complex balance of asserting independence while managing perceptions, and she sensed an undercurrent of tension in the absence of direct communication, highlighting the unseen influence that Ryan's silence and measured behavior held over the unfolding situation, demonstrating that actions rooted in self-respect and careful deliberation could impact relationships profoundly without overt declarations. Ryan reflected on the lessons of emotional intelligence, the importance of self-care, and the necessity of aligning actions with long-term goals, recognizing that by maintaining consistency and integrity, he not only safeguarded his own well-being, but also indirectly shaped the environment in which Lauren and others navigated their choices, underscoring that influence often comes from steadiness and clarity of purpose rather than from loud assertions or attempts to control outcomes. As he sipped his coffee, he observed the changing light and the patterns of daily life, internalizing the insight that resilience and strategic detachment could foster personal growth, improve decision-making, and reinforce respect in all relationships. And he felt a quiet confidence that his thoughtful approach would guide future interactions, ensuring that he moved forward with intentionality, grounded in principles that balanced compassion, awareness, and self-preservation. By the time Ryan returned home that evening, the house felt less like a shared space and more like a room waiting for a verdict. Lauren was in the kitchen with her phone on the counter, screen glowing every few seconds with Blake's name, each notification lighting up the dark granite like a small confession. She did not hide it. That was what made it worse. Hidden things at least admit they are wrong. This was open, casual, almost proud, as if Ryan was expected to step around another man's presence the way someone steps around a chair in the hallway. He hung his jacket by the door and listened while Lauren explained that Blake needed her advice about a business issue, then about a family issue, then about something only she understood because they had history. History. That word had become a key she used to unlock any door she wanted. Ryan stood at the sink and rinsed a coffee mug he had not used, giving his hands something simple to do while his mind collected the pattern. The canceled dinner last Thursday because Blake was having a hard week. The Saturday morning coffee that lasted 3 hours. The private jokes at Lauren's sister's birthday party, where Blake stood close enough to make everyone notice and polite enough to make objection look childish. The way Lauren had started saying Ryan did not get it, as if marriage was a language he had failed to learn. He had been patient because patience used to mean strength in his house. His father had been a quiet man, the kind who fixed problems before they announced themselves, and Ryan had inherited that instinct. Pay the bill before the notice. Change the oil before the engine complains. Apologize before pride turns a small crack into a wall. But some cracks are not from neglect. Some are made on purpose. Lauren leaned against the counter and said Blake was coming by later to pick up a folder. Ryan turned off the faucet. Later tonight? She looked at him like the question itself was unreasonable. It is not a big deal. That sentence had become the carpet she swept everything under. The late calls were not a big deal. The birthday gift Blake sent her was not a big deal. The way she deleted one message thread and said she needed privacy was not a big deal. One day, Ryan realized a marriage does not collapse when one big thing happens. It collapses when one person keeps calling every small wound imaginary. He dried his hands slowly and asked, "Did you cancel our anniversary dinner for him?" Lauren's face shifted. Not enough for a stranger to notice. Enough for a husband. She said it had only been coffee, that Blake needed closure, that Ryan was making it sound dramatic. Closure. Another clean word placed over a dirty footprint. Ryan walked into his office, opened his laptop, and pulled up the shared calendar. The reservation he had made at a small Italian place downtown had been marked canceled at 2:18 that afternoon. On the bank statement, a charge from a boutique coffee lounge appeared at 2:47. 2 drinks. Valet parking. A dessert item Lauren never ordered unless she wanted to linger. He stared at the screen and felt something inside him go very still. Not broken. Still. There is a difference. Broken men reach for noise. Still men reach for facts. He took screenshots, not because he wanted to build a courtroom out of his marriage, but because memory becomes slippery when someone is good at explaining it away. Lauren appeared in the doorway behind him. Are you seriously checking accounts now? Her voice carried more offense than guilt. Ryan did not turn around. I am checking reality. She scoffed softly. You are acting like I cheated. He closed the laptop halfway and looked at her. I am acting like my wife keeps making room for another man and asking me to be grateful for the corner. For once, she had no instant reply. The silence exposed them both. His hurt. Her calculation. The empty space where respect should have stood. A car door closed outside. Blake had arrived. Lauren glanced toward the window, then back at Ryan, and that glance told him everything her words had avoided. She was worried about how this looked to Blake, not how this felt to her husband. Ryan stood, picked up his keys from the desk, and placed them beside his wedding ring. The sound was small against the wood. Small, but final enough to make Lauren's eyes widen. I am not arguing with him in my own house, Ryan said. I am not competing with him either. Lauren whispered his name, but it came too late, soft only because the room had changed. Ryan walked past her into the hallway, grabbed a small overnight bag from the closet, and opened the front door before Blake could knock. Blake stood on the porch holding a folder, wearing the careful expression of a man pretending he had not entered a marriage he was helping rearrange. Ryan looked at him once, then at Lauren behind him. No scene, no raised voice, just the clean edge of a boundary. He stepped past Blake into the evening air, and the door closed behind him with a quiet click that sounded less like leaving and more like refusing to disappear any further. Ryan spent the next morning walking through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, coffee in hand, the cool breeze brushing against his face as he processed the night's events and the clarity it brought. His apartment felt empty in a way that was different from before, not because it lacked objects, but because the expectation of being overlooked had vanished, and with that vanished, a sense of control began to grow, subtle but undeniable, filling the spaces Lauren's presence had left behind. And he realized that control is not about ownership, but about the choice to step away from patterns that undermine one's sense of self, the way he used to fix minor leaks in the kitchen, preemptively, before they became floods. He now wanted to repair his life in the same way, proactive rather than reactive. He stopped by a small bookstore, one tucked into a corner of Main Street that he had passed countless times, but never entered, and inside the smell of paper and ink and the quiet conversations between pages felt restorative, almost ritualistic, as he ran his fingers along spines that promised wisdom without expectation, and he noticed a collection on leadership and personal boundaries, a title catching his eye, and he pulled it from the shelf, flipping through pages that described strategies for reclaiming personal space. Without confrontation, techniques that felt like a blueprint for the next steps in his own story, and he bought it, feeling the weight of it in his bag as a tangible commitment to his own growth. Later, he returned to the park where he used to jog. The morning sun casting long shadows and the sounds of distant children playing blending into the background, and he thought about the conversations he had with Lauren, the subtle manipulations, the casual disregard for his time and presence, and he realized that understanding those patterns is the first step to not repeating them. And as he walked, he imagined a future where he could assert boundaries without fear, and where respect was earned and not demanded through absence of choice. He practiced words softly under his breath, phrases that might sound firm yet calm, sentences that allowed no room for misinterpretation, and each repetition built a quiet confidence inside him that was both unfamiliar and invigorating. He remembered his friend's advice about focusing on oneself, about cultivating resilience. And he felt an appreciation for the mundane details of life, the way the sunlight caught on leaves, the smell of freshly cut grass, the sound of footsteps on gravel. These were not just background. They were reminders that the world continued beyond the conflicts that had defined his evenings. He stopped by a cafe on the way back, ordered a simple breakfast, and sat at a table by the window, observing people moving through the morning, noticing the patterns of interaction, the small gestures of kindness, the ways strangers acknowledged one another. And he thought about how these micro-interactions reflected larger truths about human connection, and he resolved to approach relationships with a measured attentiveness, neither naive nor reactive. He opened the notebook he had started days ago and began to write down reflections, observations, intentions, a map of personal boundaries and expectations, each line grounding him further. The pen scratching on paper became a meditative act, reinforcing that clarity is found not just in understanding others, but in understanding oneself. And by the time he closed the notebook, the world had shifted slightly, not because anyone else had changed, but because he had. And as he left the cafe and returned to his apartment, Ryan felt a steadiness that had been absent, a quiet assurance that the next steps would be guided by discernment, intention, and a resolve to honor his own worth without compromise, ready to face whatever came next with focus and calm. Ryan did not go back to the house for 3 days. Not because he wanted Lauren to worry, and not because he wanted Blake to feel victorious standing in a room that had never belonged to him. He stayed away because distance had finally shown him the shape of the life he had been living. He booked a short-term apartment on the west side of town, a clean one-bedroom above a bakery where the smell of warm bread came through the hallway every morning. The place had plain white walls, a narrow kitchen, and one large window facing a row of maple trees. It was not impressive. It was not permanent. But when Ryan turned the key and stepped inside, no phone lit up with Blake's name on the counter. No one called his discomfort insecurity. No one asked him to be mature enough to accept being replaced one boundary at a time. That was enough. On the second night, Lauren called 14 times. He did not answer. By the third morning, her messages changed from anger to confusion, then from confusion to something that almost sounded like fear. Ryan, where are you? Ryan, this is ridiculous. Ryan, Blake says you are overreacting. That last one made him stop. Blake says. Even in the middle of her husband leaving, she was still bringing Blake into the sentence like a referee. Ryan sat at the small kitchen table, coffee cooling beside his laptop, and typed one message. I am not stopping you from seeing him. I am removing myself from the place you made for me. He read it twice, then sent it before grief could soften the edges. The response came in less than a minute. What does that even mean? He could almost hear her voice, frustrated not because she did not understand, but because understanding would make her responsible. He did not reply. Instead, he opened the folder Susan Parker had helped him prepare the day before. Susan was a family attorney with a quiet office near the courthouse and the kind of calm that made panic feel inefficient. She had told him the same thing twice. Do not argue the marriage by text. Document the boundary, protect the finances, and make every next step boring enough to be useful. So Ryan did. He redirected future paychecks into his personal account, scheduled his portion of the mortgage and utilities, froze non-essential shared credit use pending agreement, and listed what property he would retrieve with a witness present. No drama, no punishment, just lines where Lauren had insisted there could be none. That afternoon, Lauren finally came to the apartment. He knew because the buzzer rang and her name appeared on the screen. For a moment, his hand hovered over the button. Then he answered. She stood in the lobby camera wearing a tan coat, hair pulled back, face tired in a way makeup could not completely hide. Please, she said. I just want to talk. Ryan looked around the apartment. The one mug, the folded blanket, the folder on the table, the strange piece of a room no one had taught him to shrink inside. He pressed the button and let her in, not because the boundary was gone, but because he was finally strong enough to speak from behind it. Lauren stepped into the apartment, as if the smaller space made every word more dangerous. She glanced at the plain white walls, the single mug by the sink, the folded blanket on the couch, and the folder on the kitchen table, then looked back at Ryan with an expression caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. This is where you are staying? She asked softly. Ryan closed the door behind her. For now, she swallowed, and for the first time, the silence between them did not belong to her. It belonged to him. She sat at the edge of the couch without taking off her coat, hands folded too tightly in her lap, the way people sit when they realize they came to explain but may have to listen. Ryan remained by the table, not far enough to be cruel, not close enough to pretend nothing had changed. Lauren began with the lines he expected. She said he misunderstood. She said Blake had been part of her life long before the marriage. She said Ryan walking out made everything look worse than it was. That last sentence revealed the old problem still breathing beneath the apology. Look worse, not feel worse. Look. Ryan nodded once and opened the folder. He placed 3 printed pages on the table. The canceled anniversary reservation, the coffee lounge receipt, the screenshot of Blake's message that Lauren had forwarded weeks earlier without thinking, the one where Blake wrote, "Ryan needs to accept that some connections do not go away just because paperwork says husband." Lauren stared at the pages and her face changed slowly, as if each line removed one safe excuse. "I did not realize you saved all this," she said. Ryan looked at her. "I did not save it to trap you. I saved it because every time I tried to describe what was happening, you renamed it insecurity." She looked down. Outside the apartment window, branches moved softly in the afternoon wind, and from below came the warm smell of bread from the bakery. Ordinary life continuing while a marriage sat on the table in pieces. Lauren's voice dropped. "Blake says you are making him the villain." Ryan almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Blake is not the center of this conversation. That is the part you still do not understand." Her eyes lifted to his. "Then what is?" Ryan tapped the papers lightly. "Priority. Respect. The fact that I had to become absent before you noticed where you had placed me." For once, she did not answer quickly. That gave the truth room to stand. She admitted Blake had enjoyed feeling important again. She admitted she liked being understood without having to explain years of history. She admitted that when Ryan questioned it, she heard control instead of hurt. Those admissions mattered, but they did not erase the pattern. A late truth is still truth, but it arrives carrying damage. Ryan sat across from her then, calm enough to be clear. "I am not asking you to hate him, Lauren. I am not asking you to erase your past. I am telling you I will not be married to someone who keeps building a place for another man and asking me to call it maturity." Her eyes filled, and this time she did not reach for Blake's name like a shield. She asked what he wanted. Ryan slid the last page forward, a simple temporary separation agreement drafted by Susan Parker. 30 days apart. Written communication about bills. No unscheduled visits. Counseling only if both parties agreed to honest boundaries. Lauren read it once, then again, her fingers trembling slightly at the bottom of the page. "This feels so final," she whispered. Ryan looked around the small apartment, at the quiet he had earned by leaving a house where his pain needed permission to exist. "It is not final," he said. "It is honest." That was the word she could not argue with. Honest did not accuse. Honest did not shout. Honest simply took away the fog. When she stood to leave, she paused by the door and said, "I thought you would fight for us." Ryan opened the door gently. "I did. For years. You just thought fighting meant competing with Blake. My fight was trying to stay married while still respecting myself." Lauren stepped into the hallway with the papers held against her chest, smaller now, not defeated exactly, but finally facing the size of what she had risked. The door closed softly behind her. Ryan stood there for a moment, hands still on the knob, listening to her footsteps fade down the stairs. The bakery downstairs rang its little bell as someone came in from the cold. Life kept moving, and for the first time, Ryan did not feel like he had abandoned his marriage. He felt like he had stopped abandoning himself. Ryan sat alone in the quiet of his apartment, the faint light from the street lamps casting soft shadows on the walls, reflecting on the choices that had led them here. He remembered Lauren's hesitations and the weight of every unspoken word between them, realizing that clarity sometimes came only with space, and that growth required courage, patience, and honesty, qualities that had always defined him quietly in the background, yet now felt more visible than ever, as if the past and future were meeting in the present moment. He looked at the small stack of papers that outlined the agreed boundaries, each sheet a step toward understanding, respect, and self-preservation, a reminder that love could exist without compromise of self-worth, and that leaving could be an act of care rather than abandonment. Across town, Lauren paused by the cafe window, sipping her coffee and letting herself absorb the weight of what had been revealed, thinking about the conversations she wished she had initiated sooner, the moments she had misunderstood, and the courage it would take to rebuild trust, even if it meant redefining it entirely, and how accountability could transform pain into learning, growth, and eventually, peace. As she realized the significance of respecting Ryan's boundaries and the clarity it brought to their fractured relationship, the evening air felt cooler now, carrying with it the scent of fresh bread and city life moving forward, indifferent to the personal transformations unfolding within, yet perfectly aligned with the idea that life moves on and that people must navigate their paths with integrity and self-awareness. Ryan's mind wandered to the small victories, the acknowledgement that standing firm had not made him bitter, only certain, and that patience and understanding could guide actions more effectively than confrontation, and how his decision to walk away temporarily allowed both him and Lauren to confront truths they had been avoiding, creating space for reflection, understanding, and genuine dialogue, highlighting that relationships are complex, requiring balance between attachment and self-respect, and that the courage to act with both honesty and care often leaves lasting impact. As the night deepened, Ryan took a deep breath, considering how his actions might shape not just his own journey, but Lauren's, and the importance of empathy, communication, and patience in all future interactions, and how even in moments of tension, clarity and integrity could provide guidance. Finally, he looked toward the future with a quiet determination, curious about how both of them would navigate what came next, what lessons they would carry forward, and how this pause in their lives might ultimately bring them to a place of mutual understanding, growth, and respect, leaving the viewers to wonder. How would you respond in a situation where honesty, boundaries, and respect collide in a relationship, and which choices reflect courage and self-respect? And if this story inspired reflection on your own values and actions, consider subscribing to follow more narratives that explore complex emotional journeys and the intricacies of human connections where empathy, patience, and integrity guide the path forward.